is the 11 Dubcast. I'm Johnny. He's George. And Ohio State coming off a dominant question mark win. We're going to talk about that against Iowa. But
depends on who you ask.
Depends on who you ask. If you ask trolls online, they would say no, Ohio State sleepwalked. If you asked other trolls online who are trolling those trolls, you would say no, Ohio State.
It had to feel like a loss for the Buckeyes.
That's right.
Didn't it?
It felt like a loss in that Ohio State won, I guess. I don't know. I don't know how to really frame that.
It's
really
a sluggish day for the top teams, according to the wittiest writer at ESPN.
That's right. Which, look, and before we get into all this, I know it's a joke. I know he's making a joke. It's not a very good joke. It's okay to just admit that you made a bad joke and people didn't really get it. Like, I've made thousands of bad jokes in my writing career online. And it's okay. Sometimes they don't land.
I'll admit I didn't write it off as a joke, but I didn't feel compelled to look into the grander context of it just because I already know from the jump that there's, a very clear bias from ESPN employees to push the SEC over the Big Ten at this point. Not only just because of the way that the great war of TV ratings has played out relative to which networks are promoting the conferences, but just because, and we're going to talk about the national landscape later, but one of the first things that happened as soon as the Vanderbilt Alabama game ended was they went back to the ESPN studio and the narrative already began that, Alabama didn't play terribly. Vanderbilt just played a great football game.
No, I did notice that too. Yeah, we'll talk about that. It is interesting that on a weekend where there were tons of upsets, a few other near upsets, Ohio State comes out and they're winning 7-0 at halftime, and then everything kind of works out the way you would expect in the second half. And it's just interesting that, I'm not saying that one writer from ESPN is indicative of how everyone else feels about Ohio State, but it is interesting to me that it feels like the national media at large is doing everything that they can to avoid putting Ohio State number one. You know what I mean? And again, the tiniest violin in the world is playing for us, right? Or it's an Ohio, it's a undefeated Ohio State team.
Woe are the Buckeye fans that spend $20 million on their team this season.
That's right. So it's really small potatoes overall, but it is funny to me how this kind of works out, where it's like, okay, Ohio State came out against Iowa defensively dominant from the jump, right? This was not a game in which Iowa was able to assert anything. They have, one of the most, up to that point, if not the most, well, not the most, because there's a guy at Boise State who would disagree with that, but one of the most productive running backs in the country, in Caleb Johnson, talks a lot of crap before the game. And justifiably, at least in the sense that this guy was racking up, I think he was averaging 170, 180 yards per game going into Ohio State, which, sure, a lot of it's relative to competition. But my point is that Ohio State came out, they asserted themselves immediately defensively. And there was no indication that Iowa was ever going to get anything going. Cade McNamara was running for his life. I think Ohio State had 4 sacks. And really the only thing preventing Ohio State from being up 21-0 at halftime was 2 really stupid turnovers, right? And that was it. And there was no indication to me, there was no worry on my part that the second half would be more of the same. I knew that they would be able to get it back on track, and they did. And they went to a team, they played a team, they didn't go anywhere, they stayed at home, but they played a team that has a great defense, one of the best linebackers in the country. They racked up over 400 yards on them. The running game worked really well against one of the better defensive lines in the country. The offensive line was asserting themselves. There was very little for me to complain about in this game, even if it didn't meet the standards of whatever the national media or, national fans or whatever are looking at.
Well, everything that I complained about after the Michigan State game, nothing that happened in the Iowa game makes me feel any better about any of that. And there were a few different things that spelled what could have otherwise been a more concerning day for Ohio State, at least in the first half, that didn't come to pass. Kirk Ferentz neutralizing his own 4th down fake punt conversion was truly
that's pretty great,
unbelievable thing to witness. And if they don't have to give the ball back in that situation and they actually do convert and they're able to keep driving. I don't think they weren't even past the 50 at that point. But
No.
like, how different is the day for Iowa? They missed a field goal very early in the game that
Yeah.
it wouldn't have given them the lead because Ohio State went down and scored on the first drive, but
Mhm.
would have at least made it, 7-3 at the very least going into the half. And I mean, we'll talk about more from Will Howard in a sec, but this was the first game where the play calling from Chip Kelly kind of rubbed me the wrong way because they had so much success running the ball on the first drive. Really, like for how I know they've only played Iowa one other time in the last 7 years, but
Mhm.
for what you think about in terms of Iowa's defense being really stout, it was shocking to me to see how effectively Ohio State ran the ball on the opening drive on their way to going up 7-0.
Yeah.
And Judkins, who continues to outperform, what our expectations were coming into this season, even though we expected them to kind of be him to be in a, tandem 1A, 1B thing with Travion Henderson, we still were expecting Judkins to be more of just a effective power runner and Travion to be the home run hitter rather than both guys having that kind of home run
Right.
every down potential.
Right.
Judkins had over 50 yards on only 6 carries to end the first half. And it felt like Will Howard was getting more opportunities to run the ball than Judkins was. And
Yeah, it
you
was
just wonder
interesting.
why he had all
Right.
that. Like, he had such a good first half. It's like, why didn't they just lean on what worked on the first drive as opposed to running so much of this through Will Howard and then that making him make
I
mistakes?
Yeah, and I wonder if some of that is in preparation for Oregon, right? Where it's like we want to make sure that Will Howard is out there understanding like what he can do within the offense, what he's able to do. Because I mean, really, they're going to try to throw Oregon's going to throw everything they possibly can at Will Howard. And Will Howard, I mean, you saw bad Will for a second, right? He threw a really bad interception. You're like, what? What are you doing, dude? Like
For the
that's
second week in a row.
for the second week in a row.
Third
However,
week in a row if we're going back to Marshall, to be
yeah,
honest.
but he also was 21 of 25 for 209 yards. He had 4 touchdowns. Two of those touchdowns to Emeka were unbelievable throws that he just put in his pocket. Like it was incredible how he's able to place those. And that's what you're going to get with Will Howard. You're going to get some of those boneheaded decisions, and you're also going to get some really next level stuff. I think part of this, honestly, I think they realized that they had Iowa in a box offensively. I didn't think they basically got 200 yards of offense, and most of those, like half of those really, were on 2 runs from Caleb Johnson in the fourth quarter. Iowa did nothing offensively pretty much the entire game. And I really think that they were like, okay, well, Howard, we're going to try to like get you acclimated, get you ready for this, because you're right. They didn't really run the ball as much as you would expect, particularly when you're going against a team that has a really, really, really good rush defense and you're still gashing them. So that's interesting. And, maybe some of it's workload too. I'm with you. Like I expected Judkins to, not necessarily be the bellwether, for the rest of the running game. I thought it would still be Travion Henderson, and it doesn't really seem to be that way. Judkins is definitely the higher volume running back. But they're both, playing extremely well. It's just the thing is, I still feel like this was a game, and maybe the entire season leading up to this is Ohio State sandbagging a little bit when it comes to formations, when it comes to play calling, things like that. Now, maybe not. I mean, I don't know. Maybe Chip Kelly is going to come out and you'll see the same kind of game plan that we've seen the past, 2 or 3 weeks. But I got to believe that against Oregon, you're going to see some things that you maybe don't expect, or at least Oregon doesn't expect. Particularly with like tight ends and things like that. You haven't seen a lot of that involved in the passing game. I think it's going to be different. And the fundamentals, I said this in the Social Reacts post after the game. I think the fundamentals of this team are incredibly sound. That doesn't mean they can't get beat. I mean, Oregon's a really, really talented team. They've got a really great quarterback, but from offense to defense to individual unit play, there are very, very few weak links here. And I don't know. Iowa made me pretty confident that they're going to be, they're in it to win it against Oregon. Despite the fact that they got to travel to the West Coast and they're playing a really great team.
Oh, and to prop up something you said earlier in that, I mean, one of the things that Day said after the game was that, part of the reason that they feel so confident going for it on fourth down, and I mean, on the first drive, I think they might have gone for it twice. I know they certainly did at least once in their own half. They went for it on fourth and short,
right?
Is because they feel so emboldened by the defense to take risk,
right?
Which I can appreciate. But at the same time, against higher level opponents, I feel like the margin for error is going to be so much slimmer.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Which is what doesn't make me encouraged by what happened with Will Howard. It's great, like that, he did as well as he did outside of the game. But those, like, the boneheaded mistakes, it only takes one of those to compromise the result, particularly while this team is settling into a trend of it's a tale of two halves. Teams are going to, despite the fact that Iowa didn't score in the first half of this game, the touchdown they got was with 8 minutes left in the game, and Ohio State already up 35-0 was garbage time. I think you would be hard pressed to argue that Iowa did not play a more effective first half than second half, and that's been the trend now. The only team that I think has gotten more, it's possible Iowa got more. I'm not sure how the yard breakdown between halves was in this game.
I was actually, honestly, I spent like a half hour today trying to figure out like that breakdown. And I mean, obviously Ohio State, dominated the second half. But it was more even in the first half than you might expect.
Well, prior to the Iowa game, the only team that had gotten more yards in the second half than the first half was Akron, and that was by a margin of 1 yard. Yeah. So the trend here, I think, is pretty clear that this team kind of likes to let the other team show their hands, so to speak, before making halftime adjustments that really let them put the clamps on the other team, and beat them in the areas that they've shown to be most vulnerable in, which is a reflection of really good coaching. But at the same time, there's a certain level of complacency that gets invited when you are settling into a trend like that. You want to see a team get out to faster starts, just so that there's sharper play, so that if you do end up making mistakes in the first half, they don't put you in a more vulnerable position in the second half. And they haven't played a high enough level opponent yet that has really been able to make them pay for that. And that's kind of what I'm worried about this weekend, is that if they let an offense that has the ceiling that Oregon's does get out to a fast start and play a better first half than their second half, how much do you trust Will Howard to be able to get you back, and at least equalize and take the lead in the second half? I would assume they're going to play a better second half than a first half based on the trends. I just wonder, what is the floor for their first half here, and what is the ceiling for the other team's second half when they're playing higher level competition than what they've faced?
And I think, maybe to your point earlier, the best way to mitigate some of that is to lean on what you're really good at. And that is the running game. And again, Will Howard's not out here throwing 40, 50 times a game, right? Like this isn't
This isn't a Kyle McCord at Syracuse situation.
This isn't Kyle McCord at Syracuse. He's going to be asked to throw 20 to 25 times a game, and that's fine. But I agree with you. I think in the first half, if you are being successful on the ground, you got to lean on that hard against Oregon, because you're right. That's going to tamp down on some of the mistakes. You've got two guys who are a home run threat every single time they touch the ball. I don't know that you need to prove anything with a Mecca or Jeremiah Smith or anybody else and say like, oh, we can hit the long bomb like in the first quarter. Like, I don't think it matters. I think you need to control the game, and then at halftime figure out those adjustments so you can take those deep shots. They did that a little bit against Iowa, but on the other hand, you also had a wide receiver and a quarterback that were like in lockstep, right? So that's, again, maybe that's the template, and just, you would hope what you see against Oregon is maybe just a maximal version of that, where it's like, okay, instead of going into halftime 7-0, maybe it's 17-0 or 17-7 or something like that. And then you control the game, and then you can kind of decide what the second half looks like. I
Yeah, in
do.
terms of fine tuning the different areas of the offense, like you talked about earlier, I'm good
Right.
with doing that when you've got a 3-score lead.
Right.
When the
That's
game is
right.
still
Right.
when
Right.
the game is at one score throughout the entire first half, you need to be building the margin so that the other team can't potentially get themselves back into it if something goes awry.
Right.
Like just lean on what is good and then worry about working out the rest of it, which is what they did against Michigan State.
Mm-hmm.
They said, "Oh, Jeremiah Smith is the best player on the field. Let's throw the ball to that guy, and then we'll go up 24-7 at the half. And then in the second half,
Just
we'll let
coast. Yeah.
we'll not even coast. I mean, Will Howard played an excellent second half against Michigan State. I mean, he had that big. They went for it on fourth down, and he had that great touchdown pass.
That's right. Yeah.
I'm forgetting who it was to. It might have been Emeka, but I mean, he played a much better second half against Michigan State than he did in the first half, and I felt comfortable giving like in tasking him with that responsibility at that point, just because the margin was there that
Right.
wasn't there in the first half.
Right.
That was not the case in this game. In this game, it was like, you know what, we're confident we're going to win anyway, so we don't care what the score is. Let's work out the kinks right now while they could still
up one
potentially
score.
bite us.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, they could still potentially bite us in the butt. So it was a
Right.
more nerve-wracking game for me than I think it needed to
Okay.
be. They got the win out. They played a great second half like they've continued doing, but nothing that happened from this game encouraged me that they're going to get the job done against their toughest test to date and probably on the regular season schedule in general this season.
I will.
Um,
So I
this
I don't
weekend.
I don't agree with all of that, but I do understand that perspective. And you can't have a sluggish start on the road, right, against Oregon. Like that's something where you're really going to have to score points early. You can't go through. Let me put it this way: Ohio State, I think, needs to get points. Ideally, at least a touchdown in the first quarter. I don't think you can go through the first quarter without scoring, and be able to, come out of there super successful. What I will say, the thing that I would add to that though, is that one thing that actually has given me a little bit of um, confidence, a little bit of hope when it comes to Ohio State attacking Dylan Gabriel defensively. And the thing about Dylan Gabriel is that if you look at how Oregon has really just organized their passing game, it's a lot of short stuff, right? They are not taking deep shots all the time. They do occasionally, as any team would.
Oh, who does that sound like?
Yeah, right. Well, that's the thing. Exactly. And that's not bad. That's not, I mean, if it's successful, it's successful. If it works, it works. And Dylan Gabriel's a great quarterback. He's also had a propensity to turning the ball over the past few games. He's thrown a lot of interceptions, I think. I think something like maybe 4 in the past like 3 games. He's not done super well in that regard. But I am a little bit heartened by seeing the evolution of Sonny Styles a little bit. He had the most tackles of anybody, including 1.5 tackles for loss against Iowa. Now, granted, you're going against Cade McNamara, slightly different talent level, but he's played a lot better in the past 2 or 3 games. His level of activity, and I think it's just kind of clicked for him where he's supposed to be on the field at any given time. That's given me a lot of confidence, I think, at least in terms of that. Cody Simon, I thought, played really well. Caleb Downs continues to be a wrecking ball. I think in the medium level, that second level of the secondary, right, past the linebackers, the safeties, and then when linebackers drop or whatever, I'm feeling a little bit more confident about their ability to keep Dylan Gabriel in check at least a little bit. I don't know. I mean, again, this is a huge test. This is the biggest test they're going to face all season. But I do feel that they've played up to their skill level, at least up to their hype level that we've seen from them in the past couple games. So I'm excited about that. That does give me a little bit of hope that they're going to be able to contain Oregon's offense to a certain extent.
I've been encouraged by the resurgence of the pass rush more than anything else myself. Because one thing that I pointed out,
they're like 8th in the country in sacks per game.
One thing that I pointed out from last week was that they had one game in conference play last year where they got 4 sacks.
Yeah.
And in their 2 conference games this year, they've I wasn't sure what the total was, but I think you alluded to the fact that they got 4 in this game as well.
They did, yeah.
That's 2 out of 2 games where they've hit that mark this year already. So
right.
that was something that we were very worried about last year, the pass rush not really showing up on a consistent basis. I think it was the only game was Penn State last year where they got 4 sacks in conference play, and then it wasn't there for whatever reason in the other games. And we were thinking, okay, we've been hyping the bookends of Tui Moalau and Sawyer all season, and neither guy has really been there on a consistent basis. What's going on here? Both guys have been a much more consistently visible presence already this year than I think they were last year. And that I think not only gives you confidence against, them going against any opponent and their ability to generate turnovers, but that also makes it an easier job for the secondary when they know that the quarterback is going to have to be actively thinking about, getting the ball off before the rush gets home, and that's going to speed up the decision making and lead to more mistakes in execution for the other team. So it's I'm more encouraged by that than anything else. I think the linebackers still kind of have a ways to go overall. But the other thing that encouraged me was that I've been more conservative in terms of in the same way that I was kind of just giving a wait and see approach with Jeremiah Smith. And he obviously has earned all of the respect that he's garnered from pretty much everybody watching the team through the season so far. There was already a lot of hype being put on Caleb Downs in the first couple of games that I was just like, he's obviously good. Let's see. Like, I'm still waiting for the standout game, the game where it's like, okay, he's clearly I think he was I think the biggest reason that they shut out Iowa in the first half of this game. I mean, he was all over the field. He was setting the tone physically, and I think the difference between having like a great defense and like an elite, like all American caliber defense just comes down to, do you have a safety that can make game saving plays at every level of the field, not just on the back end, but do you have someone that's going to be able to come up from the back level of your defense and get a tackle for a loss and stop a guy from breaking a big run? And that's exactly what he is.
Exactly. And speaking of which, I think Ohio State had something around like 9 tackles for loss against Iowa. Like, they are active. Yeah, they are active in the backfield. And a lot of that is coming from the safety position with Downs and Lathan Ransom, who, by the way, Lathan Ransom, I know we overlook this guy constantly. He's one of the best players on the defense. Just super, super consistent what he's able to do. So yeah, man, there's a lot to like there. I do think offensively, you've got to figure out a game plan to really attack Oregon from the jump. I think that's a big deal. But I also
think that the key to that game is going to be Ohio State's ability to stop Oregon running the ball, because Oregon has had a very, very, one of the best rushing attacks in the country so far. On a consistency basis this season, and Ohio State's had one of the best rushing defenses, and I think that sets the stage for, Caleb Downs has played, I think, a little bit better in every game so far this season.
Oh yeah,
I think the performance, like, I would expect that if Ohio State wins this weekend, he's going to be the biggest reason why on defense, because he's getting up to the line of scrimmage and he's shutting down the run game in the same way that he did against Iowa.
Yeah, and here's the other thing, like, you could also get a breakout kind of game like Emeka had, right, and against Iowa, where he gets 3 touchdowns or something like that. That's one of the things that I really like about this offense, is the fact that it feels like there's 3 or 4 guys at any given time who could just completely take over a game, right? Like, Quinshon Judkins could have 220 yards. That would not surprise me against any opponent. Same with Travion Henderson. Jeremiah Smith could have 5 touchdown catches. I don't know. All of these guys have the capability of breaking out like that. I want to see them kind of scheme their way towards that. I don't think it just happens organically, but that does give me some confidence. I will also say the only way, a couple of the lows, don't let Donovan Jackson try to recover a fumble. That's one thing. That's probably.
That bothered me so much.
It was so bad.
I like
just knock it out of bounds. Just knock it out of bounds.
That's something that, like, in training camp, you have to drill that just once with the whole team, and particularly with the linemen. It's just there's this weird theory that like you're not supposed to go land on top of the ball
because it'll like squirt out or something.
That's not how the physics work when you're that big of a human.
It's not greased.
No, if you collapse yourself on the ball, particularly when you're that large, it gives you the time to, cuff it then.
It's like you're hopping on a live grenade. You're just covering it up.
That is the perfect comparison. That is exactly how you should be treating it, is that you just smother it with your body, and then while you're on the ground and you can literally feel where the ball is because it is underneath your person, that's when then you get your arms around it so that when you inevitably get dogpiled on, you're going to be able to recover it. And if a player comes in and tries to like knock you while you're already that's unnecessary roughness. That's a penalty. They're not allowed to do that. So I've never understood why, like, you see it so often, even with NFL players, that these big bodies, and they're trying to
score.
They're trying to putt. Well, it's not. He didn't even try to scoop and score. He was just, instead of trying to fall on it, he was just reaching out for it while he's falling to the ground. It's like, that's the hardest time for you to make sure that you're getting a paw on it.
Especially when you're like 6'7" and 330 pounds.
Just collapse yourself onto it. It's so simple.
It was pretty silly.
You drill that once. You take like 15 minutes out of training camp to say, this is how you recover the football in a live situation. It's end of discussion. You drill that for 15 minutes, and it pays dividends in moments like that the rest of the season.
Right. Or I said, just knock it out of bounds. You're a yard away from the.
That's the smart thing to do. I can forgive a player for not like thinking like when you're near the out of bounds line, like it's in the heat of the moment, like you're trying to make sure you do the right thing. Obviously that's the intelligent play, but it's the basic thing to do there is just smother the football. It's like, it's high school 101. It's very, very straightforward.
And it just sucks because if, they don't fumble, I mean, they were driving really well at that point. They definitely score there, if not a touchdown, at least a field goal. I don't know. I mean, it doesn't matter. I mean, they won this going away, but it's mistakes like that where you're like, you can't have that against the meat of your schedule. It's
crazy how well the offensive line has played this year, and yet the worst individual performance came from Donovan Jackson.
That's right. That's right. Well, and the thing is, like, we've, over the years, I think over the past 2 or 3 years, one of the biggest consternations for Ohio State fans has been the offensive line, particularly when they're run blocking, and they've done an insanely good job of that this season. They've been great. And it's not just them. It's the wide receivers, it's the tight ends. Like, everybody seems to be on the same page about how to attack in the running game. And then you see something like that, and it's like yakety sacks, just like, and you're like, oh, what? Like, I thought you guys were cool, and they do that, but that's okay.
Ohio State Justin Fry critics are in shambles.
That's right. Well, they should be. I mean, they, like I said, Ohio State's done incredibly well on that front. Anyway, they won. It was, second half, greatly entertaining. Emeka came out and just dominated. You also got to see another inhuman catch from Jeremiah Smith. I mean, hand fighting with the DB and then just pushing him away. And I was on the internet message boards, and I saw a couple of Michigan be like, "You pushed off." I'm like, "Shut up. Like, shut up, nerd." Like, it was cool. Shut up. And they were both hand fighting. It would be stupid to call a foul there, but
it was mutual jostling.
Yes, mutual jostling. It just happened that one guy is way better than the other guy. And that was pretty sick. So wide receivers continue to be freaking awesome.
It is crazy. Like, we brought up the Ryan Williams, Jeremiah Smith thing last week coming off the Georgia Alabama game. And for how, for it being kind of between them for best receiver in college football right now, it is crazy how, like, the body composition between those two is just totally
couldn't be different.
Williams is, and granted, Williams, I don't know if you knew this, Johnny, but Ryan Williams is only 17, so
I've heard
perhaps he still has some growing to do into his frame and whatnot.
He's a skinny guy.
The guy is not 6'3", 215 pounds how much he's running like the wind. I mean, the physical profile that Smith has for as fast as he is just absolutely absurd.
Yeah.
So putting that into that context, and it was funny too, that the commentary team made this point. We got into a bit of an argument I don't know if it was last week or a couple weeks ago, where I was like, Jeremiah Smith is not starting on an NFL team. Like, come on, like that's ridiculous. And then the commentary team pointed out that's what Chip Kelly thinks Jeremiah Smith could do already right now, is that he's like, yeah, he could be starting on NFL teams. Like he's the best I've ever been around. I was like, okay. I mean, look,
well,
I'm just some guy on the Dubcast. What do I know, relative to good old Chip.
The 11 Dubcast. So tell you what, we'll do Ask Us Anything here, but we want to remind you that the 11 Dubcast is sponsored by the dry goods store at 11warriors.com. Shirts, hats, stickers, check them out. New shirt, got a new shirt there, Silver Bullets shirt, so definitely check it out. It's pretty sweet. drygoods.11warriors.com. Okay, so we got a question here. This is we're doing Ask Us Anything, by the way. We remind you that you can ask us anything by sending us questions to dubcast@11warriors.com.
Within reason.
Well, I mean, you can ask us anything. It doesn't mean we're going to answer everything. I'm just saying, like, it's a free country. You can do whatever you want. This one's from Bryant, who says, so it was in reference to my threat level article after the Wolverines barely got out of Minnesota. I wrote and saying the Tressel years had some games that were pretty excruciating to sit through. He says, however, now if we have a 38-7 win against Michigan State, but the defense simply allows the ball and go to Ohio State territory twice in the first half of a game, gather the pitchforks. God forbid we only beat Akron 52-6, but didn't cover the 50-point spread.
Right.
The question is, what changed? It's not championship expectations. Is it the gambling and point spreads? Is it something else? He thinks it was basically 2014, beating Wisconsin 59-0, and then winning the national championship. I think honestly, that's the least crazy thing about Ohio State fans is demanding that kind of success, because the truth of the matter is that Ohio State really is that much more talented than the teams that they're playing. And I'm not saying that 100% of the time the most talented team's going to win, but I'll be honest, man, like Vegas isn't putting out these lines for the hell of it, right? They truly believe that Ohio State is that much better than the teams that they're playing. And if you don't see Ohio State kind of matching up in that way or living up to those expectations, I think people tend to get a little salty. And I'm not one of those people who thinks that, you should freak out if the, if the Spartans go across the 50-yard line, or if they take a 3-0 lead 2 minutes into the game. That means nothing. And I do know that there are people out there who do lose their minds over that kind of stuff. And I think that's incredibly silly. But on a macro level, I don't know. I can see where Ohio State fans are like, we want to be Bama, right? Like, we want to be Alabama. We have the resources. We have the talent. We should have the coaching. Why aren't we beating every team 50-0? And that's sometimes it's not a completely unreasonable question to ask. Now, again, there are a lot of good teams out there, but I can see it. I don't think it's super illogical to want that, especially when you've seen a similar program achieve so much in such a short period of time.
I don't think it has anything to do with spread expectations, because this has been a recurring theme for Ohio State going back to the Urban Meyer years, well before gambling was taking more of a hold in Ohio. And I still don't even think it's really that much of a big presence among Ohio State fans at this point. I think it's a combination of two different factors. One, which I made a joke about on this show a week or two ago, is it's the evil Tom Brady meme. We're only up by 40.
That's right.
Like,
that's
there's when you have a consistent expectation and ask of greatness, you're just kind of wired into that mindset of we need to kill every opponent every single time as hard as we possibly can. Doesn't matter how much time is left on the clock. Doesn't matter what the score already is. We need to go score 7 points every single time.
Right.
And I think that's, one of the most famous quotes in the lore of Ohio State football is, why'd you go for 2? Because I couldn't go for 3.
Yeah, right.
I mean, that's that expectation has existed even before I was alive in terms of we need to just steamroll every single opponent in front of us, particularly our rivals, by the greatest margin possible. And so when it doesn't happen, it, can leave you feeling dissatisfied. But I think the other thing at play here is that there was, given we joked about it at the top of the show about, the very transparent bias now that exists between different media platforms covering this sport relative to the conferences. There was a time 10 years ago where you were labeled a tinfoil hat loony bin if you wanted to say that kind of bias existed, which it clearly did even before the great wars between the conferences that were propped up by the TV networks.
Right.
So I think for a long time, Ohio State fans had to watch the Nick Saban Alabama teams and other teams in the SEC that were routinely blowing out their non-conference opponents by astronomical margins and getting a lot of like, oh my God, they're so good comeuppance from media networks like ESPN.
Even when they didn't perform that well, they were getting this adulation and congratulations.
Right.
Oh my God, these guys, Alabama beat Southern Miss by 10 points. What an incredible defensive contest.
Right.
Alabama.
So there's envy that is born out of that I think is reflected in a lot of the Ohio State fan base. So I think it's a combination of those two factors. Okay. I don't think Vegas has anything to do with it at all.
Fair enough. Next one is from Jim, who says, this has been nagging at me and I can't research it. I vaguely remember after that Team Up North's first victory in a post-game interview, one of their defensive players made the comment, we knew their play before the ball was snapped. I think if it was the first of 3 wins and I only heard it once, was I dreaming? I tried to track this down too. I wasn't sure exactly what you're talking about. I think it might have referred to one of their safeties who kind of made a similar comment. And I know that Cade Stover actually.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Was he confusing a Michigan defender with Cade Stover?
Well, because I do remember a Michigan defender saying something like that. But Cade Stover did say earlier this year, I think during the summer, that Ohio State ran a tight end formation that they had never done, and then
it was like the week the season started.
Yeah,
he said
right. So I don't know. I mean, I think that's possible, but if you're looking for a smoking gun, I don't know that that's necessarily it. That could just be bragging, like, oh, they're just they're too predictable. That's how we got them. So super easy.
Michigan still hasn't responded to the NOA. I don't think they're going to.
They're not going to until the last second.
Which is great because that's the week of the Ohio State game.
Oh, I know.
I mean, that would be just pure. But here's the thing: like when we were talking about this way earlier on, we weren't staring at the prospect of a 7-5 Michigan season, which is now like I wasn't even willing to go that low in terms of expectations, but that's people from their side that have said we got to start inviting that possibility in terms of bracing for the worst based on how things have gone. So at what point does it it would be if you were having a blow it out season, like if they were going into Ohio State 11-0, I think at that point it's more of a smug like,
oh sure,
we can respond to them at the last second because it's like we're clearly as good as we are and it didn't have anything.
If they're limping into it, they gotta try to get ahead of that because once that all becomes public, because that's essentially what it will. Like when they respond to the NOA, it's gonna all get out there, and if they're rolling into the game and they're injured, they've lost like 4 in a row or whatever. That's the last thing that they
isn't it kind of surprising that now that things are starting to come unglued that it doesn't look like there's going to be any momentum about that until the very last second?
You know what? That will be, so they got the bye week, right?
It's been radio silence on that story since
It has been.
the NOA officially got
It'll
there.
be interesting to see if anything pops up during the bye week. That might be something to keep an eye on, to see if there is any movement on that. Because if they were going to do it and they're like, oh crap, our season, like it's starting to, swirl down the crap, or maybe we can, we'll put out something there and then try to salvage whatever we got. Yeah, I don't know. If they're having a bad season, they do not want to release that the week of the Michigan game. This is from DV3. This is something we actually talked about a little bit earlier, just kind of talking about the slow start from the defense. I don't know that it's necessarily slow. It's just not aggressive necessarily. He also talks about the lack of pressure by the D-line. D-line's doing great in terms of pressure. I think they've done an excellent job, honestly.
Better than last season.
Yeah, better than last season. Sawyer,
a low bar, but I'm glad to see it cleared.
Jack Sawyer's been a wrecking ball. That guy is everywhere. And is he like one of the best defensive ends in the country? He's close. I don't know that he's like, top 5 or top 10 or anything like that, but he's really, really active. He's been great. Linebacker play has been average. I would agree with that. They need to get a little bit better, but I don't think they've been bad. Arvell Reese is getting more snaps. I think that's smart. And Cody Simon is solid. So I'm not too worried about any of that. But it is one of those situations, like we said earlier, that you can't afford a really slow start. Going into this game, I think they need to attack and, get an interception early. That'd be sweet. Igbenogson got that INT against I would say he probably got away with one there, but hey, it still counts the same.
No, it's not that he got away with, it's that he got bailed out by the fact that the ball got tipped.
That's
but
the thing.
I don't think that
right.
I don't think that he
exactly.
realized the
exactly.
ball got tipped
exactly.
and he committed that. So in that sense, I guess he did get bailed out.
But you're right. It did get tipped, and he
he didn't get bailed out by bad officiating. He just got bailed out by circumstance.
Right. Last one here. This is from our good friend Alvin. What percentage of the playbook do you think we've seen so far?
Probably less than 50%.
You think so?
I mean, they literally against Michigan State called the exact same play that they ran to Marvin Harrison Jr. last year in the same area of the field for a touchdown. They are just rehashing very, very basic stuff. And so much of, almost everything has been attacking within 15 yards. It's been a lot of underneath screen stuff.
Is that a reflection of Will Howard's ability, or is that a reflection of how big the playbook is? Like, you know what I'm saying?
I think it's a little bit of both, but at the same time, I think that there's we haven't seen a lot of zone reads.
That's true.
Which again, I'm kind of, I don't really want to see Will Howard run it anywhere outside of the red zone. I think you save that for the scoring opportunities to put a little bit of extra stress on the defense when the field starts to shrink, and you just have your running game operate through the 2 running backs that are all American caliber at this point.
Right.
I think simplicity probably benefits them more, but at the same time, the thing that I always think back to in this question relative to what things have looked like under Ryan Day is that how much we complain about how underutilized the tight ends are, and then Ohio State plays Clemson and 4 tight ends catch touchdown passes from Justin Fields. So I think that I love the idea of saving your most sophisticated stuff for the games that actually matter and getting into the postseason, and not, especially in this era where so much of the game planning revolves around film from your opponent. Don't show your whole hand. So I like that they have kept things relatively simple. That being said, I still think that this past game against Iowa was the one I would be the most critical of the play calling, just because it was very evident early on that Judkins was going to be a breadwinner for them in this game, and they just, for whatever reason, decided to go away from that despite how effective his first drive was. So I want to see
Riverboat Gambler Chip Kelly.
There's more. Yeah. I think there's more to come in terms of this playbook. I don't think we've even seen half of what they're capable of, but I think we're going to see a lot more of it against Oregon, and then probably get back to more simplified stuff until we get to late November, and they've got to play Indiana going into the Michigan game.
I think I would say we've probably seen more than you think. And the reason why I say that is because the thing that you can say about almost all football coaches with absolute certainty is that they want to win the surest way possible, right? And it becomes like almost a self-fulfilling prophecy. If this is what you've seen so far through 5 games, it's really hard to install something super crazy or beyond that you haven't seen yet. Now, that doesn't mean they can't do tons of variations on a lot of plays that they've done. And clearly there's a lot of plays where you're like, this is definitely a setup for something else, right? Like, we're getting this on film so that this is how, opposing defenses attack this formation, and then we're going to do something completely different. That's fine. But I don't think you're going to see anything radically different. And to your point about zone reads and things like that, I think you'll see them, but I don't see that becoming a staple of the offense against like great teams or anything like that. I think they want to try to preserve Will Howard a little bit. But I don't know. I mean, that's why I'm saying I like the idea. I'm with you though, man. Like, I like the idea of saving something for those big games and coming out and doing something crazy. One of my absolute favorite instances of this was in 2004 against Michigan when Jim Tressel centered a huge chunk of his offensive game plan around Brandon Joe, who is not a person you've ever heard of. No, I mean, he was an okay player, but I think to that point he had something like 2 catches or something throughout the entire season, and they targeted him like 10 times in that game. For no real reason, just the fact because Michigan had no idea how to prepare for that. And it wasn't even
just an average Joe.
Yeah. And not in that game. He was great. So I love that kind of stuff. I think it's a lot of fun. Also fun is answering your questions. So keep sending those in to ask us anything. We will keep answering them. We got a few minutes left. Let's go over the national scene because this was a wild weekend of college football. 5 top 11 teams lost. Although, I mean, I guess Michigan's included in one of them. Sure. But some of the other upsets were pretty freaking wild and fun to watch. I mean, we're going to start with the big one, obviously. Alabama, number 1 team, getting taken down by Vandy. I thought it was going to end the same way as the Georgia game did. I thought Vandy was going to blow it. It looked shaky. I thought Milroe was just going to throw some long bomb and whatever. And Vandy would just get their hearts broken at the very end. And it didn't happen. And so often in college football, you see these nascent upsets that start out and you're like, okay, here we go. I'm going to watch this game. And then, halfway through the 4th quarter, equilibrium hits, and then the underdog loses, and you're angry that you spent so much time watching it. That didn't happen here. It was awesome. It's hilarious that it's Vanderbilt that did this. That was a great game. It was fantastic.
There's something about starting a game off with a pick 6 that just totally shatters the vibes and confidence, as we can attest to watching the game against Iowa in 2017, I think it was.
Yeah.
So it just the vibes are all right. You light, especially when it's on the road, you light a crowd on fire when you give them that much momentum to start the game. And so even though I didn't actually start tuning into the game until close to like end of the 3rd quarter, start of the 4th, when I heard that had happened, I thought, oh, that is going to be a more complicated result for them,
right,
than I think anybody would have anticipated. And of course, I mean, they were like 24-point favorites. But then what really caught my attention was that at halftime, Ryan Williams had 1 catch for 0 yards.
Exactly.
And it was like,
gone.
If they're having trouble getting that guy who like is transparently the best player in their offense, not named Jalen Milroe,
right,
the ball against an opponent like this, they're in serious trouble here.
Yeah. And I think
now that didn't reflect the fact any of those offensive mistakes, that their defense was just getting ripped up and down.
That is exactly what I want to say. And this is going to be similar to what I want to say about Michigan, but Alabama fans have been debating about Milroe forever. And like, is he the guy to get us to the mountaintop? you that's not what you need to worry about right now. What you need to worry about is the fact that Vanderbilt outgained you and we're constantly befuddling your linebackers and safeties with these quarterback runs that were just, they were just doing these little fake pitches and stuff. It wasn't crazy. It was just stuff that they could not handle. And
they
it was
gave
wild.
Up 400 yards of offense to a team that lost to Georgia State.
That's right. They were outscored in the fourth quarter, 10-7. The Pavia, the guy, Diego Pavia was on one. I mean, he was fantastic, but he threw for 252 yards. They've got issues, and their secondary is not very good. I mean, you saw that in the Georgia game. This is going to be interesting to see how the rest of the season plays out. And, if it were Saban, I'd go, okay, well, this is going to get fixed, right? Like in one game, this is going to get fixed. With DeBoer, I don't know what that looks like. I don't know.
Saban never would have invited the possibility of losing to Vanderbilt. That was one of the best parts of the post game was that they were playing the video of Saban on the Jumbotron saying every place in the SEC is difficult to play at except for Vanderbilt.
That's right.
And then the first year that guy leaves town, this happens. Yeah. I mean, I can't even it's one thing for a small, I shouldn't say small school, but a less heralded program by national standards to get this win over Alabama. But for specifically this team to do it, I think it is just really, really special and makes me so happy for their fans because outside of the Jay Cutler era, and I think maybe they had Jordan Rodgers too, like Aaron Rodgers' brother for a little bit. They never got any sort of national attention or respect really outside of when they had either bona fide NFL quarterback prospect or, just the brother of an NFL quarterback.
Yeah.
I feel like this easily has to be the happiest moment in any of the lives of their fans.
Shout out to my sister, Vanderbilt alum, who I'm not sure was aware that was happening, but she probably is happy about it through osmosis.
They're selling shards of the goalposts for thousands
to pay their stupid SEC fine because the SEC doesn't want people to have fun. Because the fans stormed the field after beating a number one team for the first time in 50 years or some crazy thing. Other games, Tennessee got upset by Arkansas, which, I mean, it's Tennessee, so I shouldn't be surprised at all, right? In theory, this should be the least surprising upset of the weekend.
They shouldn't have been a top 5 team to begin with. I don't understand why they got anointed so high so quickly, to be honest.
I think it's because people fall in love with quarterback play. And their quarterback, Nico Iamaleava, was doing really good. And people were like, okay, you're going out there. You put up 70 on Kent State. Oh, my God. You're throwing for 500 yards or whatever the hell. And I think that's it. I think that's enough for people to really lose their minds. But then they come out and they look sluggish. Arkansas plays a really good game. Yeah, I don't know, man. It's weird because, again, you should never get fooled by Tennessee, right? Tennessee should always be a presumptive, just sandbagging team that's going to screw it up at a certain point. But man, they had 2 touchdowns in the third quarter, didn't score at all the rest of the game. 332 yards of total offense, just 150 some yards of pass. They were just not good. And again, shouldn't be a surprise. Another big upset. This is within the Big Ten. USC. I don't know if it's a huge upset. USC got taken down by Minnesota. USC definitely played down to the level of Michigan in their game against them. They didn't look that convincing against Wisconsin the week after that, and so I kind of felt like that was an upset waiting to happen. And
this is 2 of the last 3 weeks now that Lincoln Riley has pissed away a fourth quarter lead.
Right. And then been a huge baby about it afterwards. So I'm not, whatever, just desserts. I'm not sad about that. I do think it's really funny that PJ Fleck of all people is the guy to take them down. Because Minnesota looked pretty inept against Michigan for basically 3/4 of their game against them and then turned it on somehow. So, I guess good for PJ for taking his tie and and
those Gophers are built for the fourth quarter, man.
That's right.
That's when they're golden.
There should have been an upset, although Cal decided to just completely choke towards the end of the game, give up 3 touchdowns to Miami.
Woke mob, more like choke mob. Am I right?
Am I right? They let Cam Ward basically throw that team back in the game. Cam threw for over like 437 yards. I don't want to say like, I'm looking at the stats right now. He threw for 437 yards. Yeah, that was one of those games where I kind of felt it slipping away. Cal looked really good and until that fourth quarter, and then they just kind of just sat on their laurels a little bit and didn't really do much of anything. You gotta score points. Shooters are going to shoot. He gunslingers like Cam Ward are just going to keep throwing until they get touchdowns, and that's eventually what started happening. Ward is interesting because I think he's super, super talented. He's another one of those guys who's thrown a lot of interceptions this season, and I think he will continue to. He's kind of a little bit wild. So in that sense, I think Miami was kind of.
And he's another one of those guys that Ohio State had interest in getting to Columbus this past offseason. It's just Miami was the higher bidder.
Yeah. And so I don't know. It'll be interesting to see how the rest of their season plays out too, because again, Ward is a guy who he's a gunslinger. He wants to get 400 yards a game. He's also got, let's see he's got 5 interceptions so far this season, including 4 in the last 3 games. So, good for them for escaping the mighty Cal Bears, but they got a lot going on here. The last one I want to talk about before we get out of here, the fun one, is Michigan getting skunked by Washington.
Skunked is a strong word. I don't know if it was that bad.
It was that bad because here's the thing. It was that bad, at least to start with. They had Alex Orji in. Washington wised up to the fact that Alex Orji can't throw the ball more than 5 yards downfield, way faster than Minnesota did. And it's really funny because Alex Orji, I think, averaged in this game 2.1 yards per attempt, which is literally like it's just the line of script. It's like, okay, I'm going to throw it to a running back and hope that they make something out of nothing. And Washington just immediately keyed on that. They weren't even bothering, doing anything but man coverage and just zero coverage and things like that. They had no interest in respecting what Michigan was trying to do in terms of the passing game. So once that became completely evident, I think Sharon Moore did the right call, which was to pull the dude and bring in Jack Tuttle, a guy who's been injured, 7th year senior, living the dream. Lots of people are called. Lots of people stay in college for 7 years. Yeah, they're called doctors. Tuttle was better. He's not great, but he was better, and he led Michigan to 17 unanswered points and the lead. And then in the fourth quarter, everything kind of fell apart, and Michigan just could not keep it together. Tuttle turned the ball over twice, once through a fumble, and once through a really bad interception. Michigan fans have been saying like, oh, that's not going to happen very often. It was just a crazy athletic play. Tuttle was staring down Colston Loveland for like 5 seconds before he threw that ball. Everybody knew where it was going to, in part because he's the only consistent receiver on that team. That was an interception waiting to happen. So, just a poor performance by Michigan overall. But the thing that they really got to worry about is their defense, man. Like, they cannot defend the pass. This is a team that overall is in like the dregs of college football when it comes to defending the pass in general. They're giving up like 260 yards a game passing, and they're also really, really bad at long scrimmage plays. They are next to last in the country at giving up passing plays of 10 yards or more. Their secondary outside of Will Johnson is kind of a tire fire right now, and I am here for it. I think it's going to be great for the rest of the season. I'm excited about that.
I'm just going to be curious. I'm totally owned in on the dysfunction going on in the backfield because it's.
Yeah, 3 quarterbacks in 6 games is pretty wild when you haven't had an injury, right?
And I use the term backfield not only referring to the quarterbacks, but it's like we've been talking about it for multiple weeks at this point. Mulling should be their guy over Edwards, But Edwards has like one long touchdown against Washington, which, was the biggest moment he had last season too. And they're ready to fall in love all over again.
Yeah. And Mullings, and part of it was because Mullings wasn't very good against Washington because they were stacking the box.
They gave him 24 carries against Minnesota, and so you thought, oh, they finally figured out who their more effective running back is, and then they split the carries again against Washington. And it's like, at what point are you going to commit to the back that is evidently better this season? And based on the fact that they can't commit there, I mean, 3 quarterbacks in 6 games that's a sign you have.
Yeah, that to me is one of the most galling things possible because, we talked about before this season, who's going to be the starting quarterback for Ohio State. We were saying that we would be angry if Ryan Day didn't figure this thing out by the time fall camp got into swing. And he did. Yeah. And we were like, yeah, okay, good. That's awesome. The fact that they clearly weren't sure about who the starting quarterback should be several games into the season like this is preposterous. Like that is just absolutely bonkers that they were this clueless. And it's not like these guys are so similar that it's like, okay, well, one guy might be slightly better one week, another guy might be slightly better next week. They're all very different quarterbacks. So either you didn't have a plan to begin the season in terms of what you wanted your passing game to look like, which I think sounds fairly likely at this point, or you were just kind of hoping that they're innate, like they could just go ahead and replicate what they did last season with JJ McCarthy, which is also stupid.
Very confused that they announced so early in the week prior to playing USC that they were going to be benching what's his name in favor of Orgy. And then they go and they make their third quarterback or second, I guess, quarterback change of the season, their third name, Tuttle, Tut, as I enjoyed referring to him as. What I'm wondering is, they did that because they recognized, okay, we're down 14-0. We are not going to be able to play from behind with a guy like Orgy, which is what we were looking forward to seeing as, Michigan critiquers. And, they were so unconfident in Moore was so unconfident in their ability to play from behind with Orgy that they said, okay, we got to get Tut in there.
Right.
But what I'm wondering now is that change going to stay permanent going into the game against Illinois, who is presumably the best team that they've played this season other than Texas?
I don't know.
Like how early are they going to announce the starter is the starter still in question at this point?
That's the thing, because remember, Davis Warren got pulled because he threw 5 interceptions in 2 games, basically, which is fine. Like, that's bad. You can't do that. But on the other hand, Jack Tuttle has 2 turnovers in 1 quarter. So I don't know.
Orgy was not the reason they went down 14-0 in that game.
No. I mean, again, he's not good. And I think of the 3, he's the worst, but there are a lot of other problems that they got to kind of solve and figure out before that. And that's kind of my point with this, is that it's going to be interesting to see how far they fall, because they've got so many other, I think, pervasive issues that they need to solve before saying like, okay, well, if we got a quarterback, so we'll be fine. That's not. They're way beyond that. And I think Michigan fans are kind of starting to wake up to that.
Conventional wisdom in football dictates if you have 2 quarterbacks, you really have none. And anybody that watched the Troy Smith, Justin Zwick situation many years ago will affirm as such. So,
but if you have 3, Michigan, you're doing great.
Yeah, watching Michigan go through this as an Ohio State fan, you love to see
it. It does not suck. So. I'm happy about it. Couple more things before we get out of here. Women's ice hockey. I got to mention them. Look, they swept St. Lawrence in a 2-game series. Okay, sure, they didn't start out the season super hot, but you know what?
Yeah, you freaked out too much about that.
You know what? Maybe I did.
Season.
Maybe I did. They took out Bemidji State. Now they've taken out St. Lawrence. All the stars done is out there kicking butt. I mean, they're doing good, and they're putting up points too. That's the other thing. Put up 5 goals in the last game against St. Lawrence. I'm telling you, man, they're starting to get it together. Trust Muzzerall, she's got it under control. I'm not worried. I'm cool as a cucumber, George. And one more thing you want to mention, I forgot. I almost left it hanging before we left.
In case you didn't watch the UFC pay-per-view this past weekend, which I can't blame you if you didn't, because it was in Salt Lake City and it was a pretty terrible all-around card. But You may have missed Middletown, Ohio's own, obviously good friend of Johnny.
Yeah.
Kayla Harrison set herself up for a title shot. She 30-27 Ketlin Vieira. It was pretty it was a dominant performance, although Harrison admitted as much in her post-fight interview. It was the first time that she's ever bled in MMA. So it was the most competitive, despite the fact that she closed as a 12-1 betting favorite. It was arguably the most competitive fight that she's had to deal with in the UFC so far, even though she's only had, I think, a couple. But she's probably going to fight for the bantamweight title in her next fight. And you're going to want to see that, just so that Ohio State or the state of Ohio, rather, can brag about having its first UFC champion since, I guess you can count Stipe Miocic since he's an adopted son of Cleveland, but the only other one would be Cody Garbrandt, I think, going back to 2016.
Right. Well, shout out to Kayla Harrison, who went to my middle school, not while I was there. I think I was gone for a year or two, and then she joined up.
She and Johnny were best friends.
Yeah.
Johnny has so many great friends.
Yeah.
From Middletown.
Okay. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, we'll get into that. That's the Dubcast for this week. We'll be back. We'll be back. It's fine. We'll be back next week to talk about Ohio State and Oregon and all the other shenanigans that go on throughout the weekend and throughout the week. But until then, I'm Johnny.
I'm George.
And we'll see you next time.
Take care, folks.